Enjoy a seat at the table and good company, where great conversations and meaningful discussions happen.
Welcome to And Good Company. I'm Sarah Fiedelholtz, a conversationalist. We all know that the food isn't what makes a dinner party great. It's really the conversation, the people sitting around the table having enjoyable discussions. And Good Company creates a way to capture smart and important conversations as they happen. I am very pleased to be in the company of Michael Galbraith, the president of Fort Wayne's Downtown Improvement District. Welcome.
Sarah, thank you.
So I wanted to approach our conversation a little bit from the idea of looking at from your past to the present and future, with one exception. So
okay.
That's how we're going to sort of, but we'll see where we go. So the interesting thing that probably a lot of people may not know about you is that you actually play third French horn in the Fort Wayne Philharmonic.
I do. That's how I got to Fort Wayne, is that I won that job coming out of graduate school.
Because you studied history, and I didn't know that you could study French horn performance.
You can. That's one of those rare degrees out there.
So how did you, I always have wondered when a musician picks an instrument, how did you get to the French horn?
I guess it's not that interesting a story, but my dad was a band director before he was a school administrator, and so I started band just like most kids did in about 5th grade, and he helped me try out different instruments. So we tried out clarinet and trumpet and trombone, all those different kinds of things, and the way that the French horn mouthpiece fit the way that my lips are shaped seemed to work, and so I just started that, and he set me up very well. I've never ever had to change my embouchure or how you set up the mouthpiece onto your lips.
So did he typically put you towards the reed or the wind because he knew about your...
He did a little bit, but I also think that there's some degree of personality in each of those instruments, and so I've never been one of those super out front extroverted kind of kids. So the French horn's not the trumpet. It's not
the saxophone,
right? Where you need to be out front leading the band.
Right. So did you want to be a professional full-time musician? Is that your...
Yes, and so that's one of those things that I struggled with in college, is that's one of those things like playing any type of profession that you need to have a physical component, whether that's dance or football or sport or anything like that, that those muscles that are in your embouchure, you train them since your time you were 11.
Right.
And it's really hard to come back to a muscle-based profession when you're 60.
Right.
And I always knew that I had multiple interests, and so I knew that was one of those things that if I ever wanted to be a French horn player, I had to do it early and right away.
So how did you get to Fort Wayne then?
I was in graduate school in Bloomington, and I started playing extra in different orchestras. So when music is written, sometimes there's a standard type of an orchestra that has 4 French horns. But some of those big romantic composers, the Bruckners, the Mahlers, the Strausses, wrote for 4, 6, 8 different horns, and so they would hire extra people in these different orchestras when they played those pieces. So I was playing in Indianapolis and Owensboro and Evansville and Columbus and Fort Wayne, and there was a position that was open here in Fort Wayne, and so I kept getting called more and more and more often, and then there was an audition and I won that, and so came up here, and then there was another audition for the 3rd position, so I came up and won the position for 4th, and then came up and won the position for 3rd. So.
And this is a very interesting time for the Fort Wayne Philharmonic.
It's a very difficult time for the Fort Wayne Philharmonic.
Yeah. So how are the musicians doing and faring considering the times?
It's tough for them. There are a few of us in the Philharmonic that have 2 incomes and 2 professions, but most of my colleagues are only musicians. And so they've been furloughed for the remainder of what would have been 2020 season through 2021.
Right.
It essentially is the same time as an academic year.
Okay.
So September through May.
Okay.
And they're all unemployed.
And is the Fort Wayne Philharmonic, do they have full-time, like are certain, like the first chair, are those full-time?
Right.
And then there are people like you that are part-time? part-time or?
Actually, I'm a full-time musician for the Philharmonic. There are 43 full-time positions,
Okay.
And I think there's about 15 or 16 part-time positions. And then they hire a number of extras that will come in to play other instruments
Okay.
As needed to
Okay.
fill in extra violins or that
Okay.
type of a thing.
So you actually have then 2 full-time jobs.
I have 2 full-time jobs.
And then also, you and I talked about before about that the Philharmonic the musicians don't have a contract yet, right?
The Philharmonic musicians do not have a contract with the Philharmonic and have been negotiating with the Philharmonic for the better part of, at this point, almost 2 years.
And is there any resolution or anything? Because there's a lot of excitement now with taking Chuck Surak and the bakery and creating this Philharmonic kind of home and center.
Yes. I am not on the negotiating committee, and the latest that we've heard, which was earlier this week, was that they were canceling the rest of the spring season. I'm sure that there will be a communication from the Philharmonic and from the Musicians Union explaining the 2 different interpretations of how that happened.
Does it lend that the risk that you might lose some musicians because they have to get a full-time job or they may have to move? Or?
Yeah, it's going to be very difficult for a number of them to survive on unemployment alone for, at this point, the better part of a year.
Right, and some of them, the full-time, maybe they supplement it with teaching or something.
Sure, and some of them, there are a number of them that are married to other players in the orchestra, and so those 2 Philharmonic couples, I really, my heart goes out to them because they've had not only one spouse's income disappear, but they've had both spouses' income disappear.
That's just heartbreaking. And
absolutely.
At least the community has come together in some ways to try to help support artists and.
Yeah, and it's a difficult time in this COVID epidemic because it's difficult to gather people. We found that at the Downtown Improvement District that it's changed all of the ways we think about bringing people downtown. We were super happy to bring 8,000-9,000 people downtown for events, and that all of that just can't happen right now.
Right. So you have to really rethink everything.
Absolutely.
So yeah. So before we talk about the Downtown Improvement District, I wanted to take a step back to start a little bigger.
Okay.
Which was when you worked for the Northeast Indiana Regional Partnership.
Sure.
And you were the director of the Road to 1 Million.
Right.
And you have a lot of gigs actually.
I do.
Because you also still serve as, I guess, a consultant. You're as the administrator for the Northeast Indiana Regional Development Authority.
Correct.
Right?
That's a case of not changing riders in midstream.
Right.
This has been a grant that most of the activity for that regional cities grant has taken place already, and so
that was the $42 million.
Correct.
Northeast Indiana Regional Cities.
Right. The
grant.
regional cities grant was $42 million, and it went to 3 different Indiana communities. It went to Evansville, the Greater Evansville region, the Greater South Bend region, and the Greater Fort Wayne, Northeast Indiana region.
And what was it designed to do?
It was designed to answer the question of how do we make sure that Indiana is a magnet for talent.
Okay.
And those were designed to look at quality of place projects.
Okay.
So changing the idea that we wanted to be able to not have that brain drain happen, and that we wanted to be able to attract people with skills to stay in Indiana and come back to Indiana.
And isn't that also is part of the Road to 1 Million type of project?
Right. Those are those types of projects that we looked at throughout the 11 counties of Northeast Indiana.
Okay. So I want to talk about this whole idea of talent attraction.
Sure.
All right. So partly, and we have to say that we're looking at this in some ways pre and post COVID. Okay. So the first thing that I want to get on my soapbox on about is this whole idea of cost of living and how people believe that the cost of living here is lower, and how that's not true because there's cost of living and cost of housing. housing costs, like to purchase a house, yes, you can still buy a house here, for under $200,000, but in most cases you're going to have to put in, so I question that about that. But cost of living is not less expensive here, because cost of living is traditionally costs of goods and services. So a Starbucks is a Starbucks. I think food is very expensive. It's expensive everywhere. I don't think that cost of living is truly lower. I sort of joke that I feel like you all drank the Kool-Aid, but I think that benefits really the legislation, the government of the state, to be able to say to prospective companies that would come here to be able to say, well, our cost of living is lower, so you can pay less. Because I had that experience when I moved here, when I went to negotiate. They said, well, we don't need to pay you as much because the cost of living is less, but it really isn't. Just like when you take a job in New York City, they do give you a 10 to 20% bump because of the cost. But I think it really, at the end of it hurts you here. Yeah,
one of the things that when I was at the regional partnership was we were trying to figure out how to raise the per capita personal income of the region, and that showed a very large decline that hit the bottom in the 90s, and as we as a region wanted to say that each time somebody's getting paid 90 cents on the dollar, that doesn't help them as they look at being competitive in a world environment. When you look at, and I'm going to push back a little bit on the idea of the cost of living being a determinant factor. The cost of living is lower when you look at the entire basket of your monthly or yearly expenses, of which housing is one of the larger expenses in your basket. You're right that if you buy a brand new car, it's going to cost you the same in New York, in Miami, and in Fort Wayne. But some of the other things are going to cost you less in terms of your housing. Typically, your taxes, particularly those SALT taxes, the state and local taxes, are going to be significantly
less. Although in Florida, you don't pay state taxes.
Well, and those are the peculiarities of each of the different states. And so in Texas, you don't pay an income tax.
But I also think that because of, and this parlays a little bit into the downtown improvement district, with so much changing downtown and the amount of residential that's happening and going to continue to happen. And so rent and housing costs are going up, almost double, or if not 3 times the average rent before. And they say it's because people, where you're living and the destination. And so I think that housing costs, again, yes, when I look at my rent, to me, what I was a bargain, but to people here, they think it's like outrageous.
Yes. And when you look at the comparison between renting a house or renting an apartment and owning a house or owning a condominium, the cost of ownership here is very low relative to other jurisdictions.
But now it's relative everywhere, because mortgage,
Right, mortgage rates are low. But the initial acquisition cost for a house is really still pretty low here in Northeast Indiana, even though for the last 8 or 10 months we've been, if not the hottest real estate market for house purchase, but it's certainly been one of the top 5 markets over that last time.
And what I have found interesting, like in the building I live in downtown, so most of the people who live there, either they're not from Fort Wayne. Like, they are not people who move from one apartment. It's mostly people who move to Fort Wayne for a job, or their company, brings them here for a project, or it's empty nesters who actually sold their big house out in the, northwest, up north, and they wanted to try living downtown. And that's the majority of people. So it really isn't, it's not like people who have already lived here or are from here who want to live downtown. So I think it's really interesting.
Well, that opens up a really long conversation about the types of housing that we have here in Northeast Indiana. And I've spent a little bit of time looking at that in my role at the regional partnership. And we had a firm from New Jersey come out, Lori Volk from Zimmerman Volk, who did an analysis not only of the downtown housing market in Fort Wayne in 2012 with an addition, I think, in 2014. But she did an analysis of the regional housing market in 2020. And what we see is that there's been an ability for builders to make the most money on building housing units that are at the top end of the spectrum,
Right.
or conversely, those that are receiving a lot of federal grants
Right.
At the bottom end of the market. But what we're finding is that as a region, we need more and more of those houses that are that type of entry-level house, that are not, at the very expensive end,
Right.
and are above the federally supported
Right.
level.
Right. And that, yeah.
And we don't have enough of those.
No, and also the issue with really downtown is there's not a lot to buy.
Correct.
Because after the 2008-2009 recession, banks weren't willing to give developers to be able to do apartments and condos. The risk was too great. So
Yeah.
I'm sort of thinking that maybe some of them will convert over to condos at some point.
That's certainly
but-
possible. When you look at the ones that are federally supported, they've got a limit on how long that they have to remain.
Right. But I think like my building, at some point,
Yeah,
I wonder if they'll.
and whether or not that happens is an economic decision.
Right.
And right now, I think that economic decision is in favor of remaining as an apartment.
Sure, well,
because
they make more money.
they're making more money, and they
Right.
have very low vacancy rates, and so why would they change?
Right. So we're going to jump around. So
Sure.
the Downtown Improvement District, it's this 99 block district, and I always thought it was 99 blocks because there was some historic significance. So tell me how this 99 block and how it was created.
Okay. We've been in existence for 26 years. We were started in 1995, and so every 10 years we're reauthorized. And the first boundary of the Downtown Improvement District was 21 blocks. And so it was a significantly smaller footprint. But that was successful enough that the surrounding area wanted to become a part of that. And so it went in the second authorization from 21 to 91 blocks. And the way that authorization works is that there is a petition that the taxpayers signed saying, I want to be a part of this district. And it needs to be, at the time of the authorization, it needed to be 50. It's been changed to 60
Right.
based on what was happening in Indianapolis.
And just to clarify, the taxpayer, it's not us, it's the building owners.
It's the property owners inside that 99 blocks.
Okay. And the next time you're up for, I guess, reapproval is
2025.
2025. So how does the fact that there is these plans for so much mixed use and residential downtown and within even the 99 blocks, how does that sort of shift and make you rethink the role of the improvement district, and what kinds of initiatives do you think that it will make you have to change
Sure.
or relook at?
We've looked at the initiatives of downtown as sort of a pyramid type of a basis. At the very bottom of the basis was the idea that we needed to make sure that downtown was safe and clean and green.
Right.
And so we end up providing a lot of those government plus services. Beyond that, you need to start the idea of how do you bring people downtown. And above that is the marketing of downtown and changing the perception of downtown. And above that is the idea of how do you start to become very active in developing downtown and finding those micro tactical redevelopment projects that you can assist with, and further and further
Right.
up into changing policy and all of that. Changing the mixture of downtown to include residents, which has been a very long time goal of the city, and that sort of live, work, play
Right.
triangle,
Right.
is changing the way we think about downtown. We have not typically spent as much time with the residents of downtown, and that's something that we are working on figuring out how to do that. Typically, the residents have been almost in another type of district, so whether that's an East Central or a West Central, a Bloomingdale,
Right.
Hoagland, Masterson, some of
Right.
those borders are overlap in the downtown area.
Right. But I think that there's opportunity because even for funding, like, friends of the Downtown Improvement District, because as a resident, I think that there needs to be consideration with more and more apartments and residential, certain services, like for instance, you and I talked about this, that there is no plans for a dog park, yet all of these buildings, that's very important to people.
Correct.
And even the Midtown Crossing apartment, which didn't allow dogs, they just a couple months ago voted to allow dogs because they said they needed to be more competitive. And you and I even talked about that across from your office.
Absolutely.
You had to put up a sign. So I think that there are certain services like that that residents need in an area. I always joke you need a dry cleaner, which we have,
right,
and then a grocery store, which we're supposed to get. But other services like a dog park and things like that. And so I think that having I think you could get, like my building, I could get you all the people that, who have pets and stuff and who want to also be involved in what happens downtown and where they live, just like if you lived in, the West Central neighborhood or neighborhood associations. Like there is no downtown neighborhood association.
You are 100% correct. There is no downtown resident association. And we've talked about neighborhoods as being kind of outside of downtown.
Right.
And that's morphing over the last 5 years, so that downtown is itself becoming a residential neighborhood, in addition to the fact that it's a business neighborhood, that it's a retail neighborhood, and that it's a restaurant neighborhood. All of those kinds of different business interests have a little bit of a rub in them. So for instance, you want to make sure that restaurants have a lot of people downtown.
Right.
But that means that they're going to need somewhere to park.
Right.
And if you're a resident, you want to be able to park near where you live.
Right.
And so some of those things are going to rub a little bit.
Well, they do, like in Chicago, like your neighborhood, you get your parking permit. But here's an example of a perfect where I think there's a conflict between like the city and the city's goals and maybe for people who live here, and your goal is trying to improve downtown. So of course we know there's the issue of parking, and people think that there's no parking, which is not true. I mean, and then they think they have to pay for parking. But one of the things that I have noticed is the parking enforcement from the city, they are overzealous. I mean, they are out. I mean, I've never gotten so many parking tickets. Now, granted, you'd say, okay, it's $10, but still, I mean, I got a ticket because I was over, the two white lines, I got a ticket. And literally, I was like 2 minutes. I think, I wonder, I joke that they must have something that tells them, this meter is going to expire. Because they're literally within 5 minutes of my meter, I get a ticket. So I think that people also feel like there's that conflict, that rub of, that I understand the city makes money from the expired meters, but at the same time, if you want to build a place where people come and stay, and granted, they on the weekends, you don't have to pay to park, but I think that's the kind of conflict. Like there's two entities that have different purposes.
Sure.
So how do you sort of reconcile that?
A really complicated question. You want the parking authority to be a positive.
Right.
For
they're
the
very
city.
nice. I'm very good friends with Jerome.
Yeah.
He's the one who does my area, and he's very nice.
And the people that are enforcing parking are doing exactly what they're supposed to do.
Right.
And the fact that we've got new parking meters where they blink green if they're good and they blink red if they're not.
They're a little easier to indicate.
They're a lot easier to see.
Right.
But as you said, parking is not necessarily as big a problem as the perception of parking.
Right.
And we really do have a lot of parking downtown.
Although I think it would be fun if every once in a while you worked with the parking enforcement and they gave someone a golden ticket. Like they give them a ticket, but in it is like a golden ticket. Like you acknowledge, like they say, okay, you expired, and then you see it and you're like, oh God, I got a ticket. But then when you open it, there's like, okay, this is to say you're not, you don't have to pay for the ticket.
Sure.
I think there are certain things like that could sort of do that mix. Like similarly with the parking meters that they put out to raise money, to help all these nonprofits. And that was more driven from the city, but you certainly collaborated.
We were a very minor partner in that.
Okay.
That was really driven a lot by the city in Greater Fort Wayne.
But I think it's a great way to shift a perception about parking meters.
It is, and that there is the the parking meters are actually contributing to the nonprofit sector,
Right.
which is a new and kind of creative element that
Right.
that the clerk brought to that.
Right.
The parking thing, I want people to be able to park close to where they have their services, where they have their residences and all of that kind of stuff. But there's more parking
Right.
demand for that than there is supply, even though, it may be a couple of blocks, which is really
Right.
a minor thing in the scope of living in a city. Looking at, the cost of breaking the law on parking, there are people in the city that run up their parking tabs,
Right.
Because they see that $10 parking
Right.
ticket as, okay, well, that's the cost of doing business.
Right. Well, that's what people say. Well, it's only $10. But even this idea, like people here, I think that they have sort of been indulged that they don't, they want to park right in front. Like, I don't understand the logic of why they are opening the landing to cars. I was like, they created this phenomenal pedestrian promenade, and there's so much. Why would they want cars there? I just didn't understand what their thinking was. Because
Yeah.
even if you let cars on both ends, maybe double park to run in to pick up or do it. Okay, that I could understand. But to allow, I'm just like.
Yeah, and I think that's somewhat of a decision based on the fact that there are 3 different types of usages in the landing.
Mm-hmm.
Certainly the pedestrian retail experience that's on the ground level of all of the landing buildings
Right.
Mitigates against having cars and
Right.
trucks there. But if you're a business or if you're a resident up on some of those floors above, if you need deliveries, whether
That's different. A delivery or something, that's different.
Yeah.
But I don't think people using it as like a throughway, I just didn't understand. Because
I'm hopeful that it doesn't become a throughway, that it's really
Mm-hmm.
used for the benefit of those people that are living and working on the landing, and not necessarily a pass-through for other places.
And-
Just because of where it's located, I don't think it'll become that big of a pass-through.
No, and I have noticed that people are driving slowly. So, and I will admit, I did need to. I would pick up order because then I was going to bring it to some for lunch, and I did double park right in front of Nawa and picked it up. So it was easy, but also you're based on now with things like that, like with a development kind of project like the landing, which is a rather large, and then some of the other mixed-use projects around there, and then also with more going on, around the landing and things like that, and then. I think, and obviously with COVID, the role that the downtown improvement district is really changed.
It's changed. We still need to be able to support our businesses. We need to be able to bring value to our property owners. We need to continue to figure out new and innovative ways to bring people downtown,
Right.
Because that's what drives the commercial
Right.
environment. If you have people coming downtown for a festival, they're going to likely eat, they're going to likely drink,
Right.
they're going to shop. The same is true when we have people coming downtown for art, and when we have people coming downtown for other types
Or
of
people
things.
coming for conferences or things like
Correct.
that.
And now that we don't have things like conferences happening,
Right.
and now that we don't have the embassies, had a much reduced schedule, and the tin caps have had to cancel their season.
Right.
You're just not drawing as many people.
So how does that influence? You've come up with some innovative programs, clearly, with the outdoor dining and the heaters, and that was a big hurdle that people don't realize. To get those heaters, it wasn't to get them to allow restaurants to have them. It was the fact that you couldn't buy them.
Yeah.
Because every city wanted them.
Correct.
So you got 50 of them?
And I think we're at about 46 or something like that, so close to 50. And we're still looking for them, as is every other city in the northern hemisphere, because winter hits all of us at about the same time.
Right. And then you also extended the clean and green expansion to do really, and I never really thought about it, like, the buttons for pedestrians to cross.
Sure.
And door handles. So, I've always been so impressed with the clean and green. I love all the planters and how they change the flowers and things every season.
Well, downtown years and years ago, looking back into the 50s, downtown Fort Wayne was a really vibrant city with, streetcars coming back and forth, and lots of street level shopping, and you could get dry cleaners, you could buy a shirt, you could buy a hamburger.
Stores, yeah.
Correct.
Yeah.
All of those different things, and for such a long time we had a decline in that into the 60s, 70s, 80s, and 90s. Most downtowns. That's coming back now, but there's the reality of what we're experiencing now, and then there's a perception.
Correct.
People talk about the Rust Belt, but the Rust Belt has had success becoming beyond the Rust Belt over the last 20 years.
Well, they also think that the Midwest actually will recover faster than the coasts from COVID, and and I think that, but you also I like the meal delivery service, so you really looked at a way, so if people aren't coming downtown, but they want to, order, and then you're working with a local company, which I think is great, as opposed to Uber Eats or something. You're working with Waiter on the Way, so you actually are also helping a business.
Right.
So I think that was really great, but I just don't know. I mean, because the last thing you want is a downtown that has empty storefronts. And I know, granted, Caliente, which I really like, closed, but at least Big Apple went in. But then P&N Apparel, they just closed. And I just can't imagine that a lot of those shops on Wayne, I just don't know how they're going to be able to survive.
It's an interesting question. I came through the historic preservation movement.
Right. And you also were the executive director of ARSH.
Right. And so there's an assumption that any change on a historic building is bad. And that's not really what it is, because I think you have to start with the assumption that cities grow and change.
Right.
And part of that is that businesses are going to come and go.
Right.
So the fact that Caliente was in there, there was a fantastic Italian restaurant that was in there before Caliente, and they had a great run, and then they closed. And Caliente had a great run, and then they closed. Big Apple Pizza has come in, and they're doing gangbuster business. The same is true with P&N. That building has had dozens and dozens of tenants in the life of the building. And so that's a really natural part of the evolution of cities.
No, right, and that's what Jane Jacobs said. I mean, they've changed them, and just like
you're talking about one of my biggest influences.
Yeah, well, I've been becoming very interested. Like, I didn't know that you could do urban planning and urban design.
Oh yeah.
So now I've been taking a lot of courses online and stuff, and also one of the influences talking about that is with the Gell study that we had done about how we use public spaces, and then what was the outcome of that, and then also talk about how Art This Way and how that all became part of what you do.
Starting with Jane Jacobs talks about lots of different things, but she talks about the idea that streets succeed when there are eyes on them. And the only reason there are eyes on them is that there are people going back and forth doing their daily business. For years and years, we didn't have enough of that in downtown. So the idea of stickiness is a Malcolm Gladwell type of a thing. But we are trying to help the city create places that are sticky.
Right.
And the city of Fort Wayne's been a fantastic partner in saying, we need to create places like the Hello Alley and like the Port Jeff Calhoun that are public spaces that people want to linger in.
Right.
And those create those eyes on the street that really helps to keep things safe.
And again, that goes back to reality versus perception about alleyways.
Correct.
Right.
And the alleyways, the Gale study, when they came in from Copenhagen, they said we had the cleanest alleyways of any city that they've ever been.
They are very clean.
And that's kind of that Midwestern work ethic that we've got, that we have taken an inordinate amount of pride in the fact that we do keep our city clean. And people take pride. One of the most heartening things in the year that I've been at the DID was the morning after the George Floyd demonstrations that had some broken windows.
Right.
We had a spontaneous group of people that just showed up and said, I want to clean up the broken glass in my city. We helped to organize that, but the call that went out really was spontaneous, and people were responding to it.
But it was also spontaneous when they put up all the plywood, and then the artists sort of did,
Well, that was a function of Art This Way. Is
Right.
that there were some artists that came together: Dan Schwartz, Adam Garland,
Right.
Alex Hall.
And it was also the woman, Susie, who owns Elysium Montessori School.
Correct.
That she really was this impetus for that.
That she hired Adam Garland,
Right.
who was one of those artists, and they said, let's do this in more places.
Mm-hmm.
So we actually hired artists and had them paint messages that said, how do we make this problem better?
Right.
Not that this isn't a problem, but how do we make
Right.
it better?
Well, how to, or maybe be able to use it as a teaching lesson or something.
Correct.
And now there's a big issue that I guess there's a committee about what to do with them.
Right.
And,
Right now they're on display at Wonderkammer, and then we've partnered with the Fort Wayne Museum of Art in the Scholastic art and writing competitions to have those be something that people create art and
students,
words that the students do.
We had Alexandra Hall on, and
Yes.
she was telling us about that. But Art This Way really started as this independent entity, and then part of what I think your sort of talents are, like I said, we're starting with your past, is you bring a lot of that idea of looking at things differently, which certainly the Northeast Indiana Regional Partnership does, and collaboration and bringing entities together, not trying to compete. So this year you created that. Really, the Art This Way has been folded into, right?
We've always partnered with Art This Way, and it's been sort of an independent. We've been their fiscal sponsor for making sure that the funds that come into Art This Way have a place to live and that they're accounted for and all that kind of stuff.
Right.
But it had not been as tightly a part of our organization, and that's one of the things that I had a very wise friend tell me. They said, Alex Hall's a rock star, and figure out how to give her as much money as you can, and let her do her cool things. And that's been really good advice. And so I have the ability to say, if you can identify a rock star and give them the resources they need to do cool stuff, that's a great reflection on you.
And then also the thing is that I think what's interesting is that, people don't realize that the idea, and you saw it, we talked a little bit about it with the RDA, and is the idea that placemaking and quality of place really has become an economic development engine or driver, more so than ever. It used to really just be about jobs.
Yeah.
And now people are, it's very important. But I think I think that a lot of what people don't realize about the events that you do, and also with the murals, and then like the alley and stuff, is those become places of place keeping.
Yes.
Because they continue to have usage and people use them and integrate them. And so really you've also had to, you sort of had to shift that and the types of programming and things. Now granted, COVID has sort of changed that, but how has that reflected your thinking in what, and the direction going forward? Because you've been there a year now, so you sort of did your listening and, sort of identified areas, and now, it's time you're going to start putting your, print on it. And Bill did a fabulous job.
Yep.
And so what do you think about that, and where do you think it's going?
That's a really broad question. Yes, talent is one of those drivers of economic development, and that started with people thinking about what was happening with Richard Florida and the idea of a creative class, and that people chose where to work.
Right.
And so some of that has a lot of impact in Northeast Indiana. Some of it doesn't. There's a former state of Indiana official who used to say we have oceans of opportunity in Indiana, even though we don't have actual oceans. So some
well,
of
that's
the
okay. I live less than a mile from the ocean, and ask me how many times I went.
Right.
So
But the idea that we are creating a place that people enjoy being is the idea behind that. And especially if you look back only 2 or 3 years ago, we had 2% unemployment in Northeast Indiana, and thousands of unfilled positions. And we were begging for people to come back to Northeast Indiana. that's not going to go away.
No.
The fact that we have the biggest generation, or the second biggest now,
Right.
of the baby boomers
Right.
that are migrating out of the workforce over the next 10 to 15 years, that's still going to happen. People are still going to get older every
Yeah.
single day,
Yeah.
and they're going to leave the workforce. And
Right.
so we're going to have a dip where people are going to fight for talent. And economic development has, the traditional way of looking at economic development is how do you bring a company with those jobs to a
Right.
region. But that's sort of turned on its head, and how do you have the workforce that will attract those companies?
Or like there's in Vermont and in Oklahoma, there's that actually will pay you
Yes.
$10,000 to move there because, and we really are seeing this with COVID, that where you don't need to physically be in an office, that you can work from anywhere. And partly what people like, I think, about the Midwest is that it's pretty easy to get to places. I mean, when I lived in Miami, it would take me 8 hours just to get out of the state, let alone, but here you could be in Chicago, Toledo, Detroit. So you really can, go to if you needed to go for business or be easy access to an airport. Like I think, the Fort Wayne International Airport is just the easiest airport to fly out of. And so I think that that's absolutely changing. But do you think that we have enough of the jobs versus careers?
Really good topic of discussion. That's been identified as one of those issues, is that if you look at the needs of what people are looking for when they look at a job, they look at not only what's my job, but what are my paths upward in that career, and then what are the paths of my spouse upwards in their career.
Right.
And so we have some gap areas in our jobs, and I think that almost every small market city in the country has gaps in their job ladder upwards, just because of the fact that we've had a lot of industries consolidate and move some of their operations to be centrally located in some of the bigger metropolitan areas in Chicago, New York, California, all of those areas.
Right. And you also have the issue that if it's a new CEO, they might want to move the headquarters and stuff. But the other issue we have, which goes back to your experience with 1 million, the road to 1 million, is the idea that even before COVID, they call it the stuck America, that people are not moving because, first of all, no longer are the days when a company will move you. And I can tell you personally it is very expensive to move because you not only have to move all your stuff, but to set up a new home. And they find that the two reasons somebody will move is for a job and because of family. So family, obviously, that's originally why I moved back from Chicago to Miami. Okay. But from a job standpoint, it used to be that you would move for a $20,000 bump in salary. That was really significant. But in today's world, if half of that is going to just be eaten up by the move itself, and then the other half is going to have to be eaten up by maybe childcare or things because you're leaving the city that you live in. Maybe you had family there. $20,000 is no longer enough. So we actually are in a state people are not moving as much as they used to. So, and I know, the Northeast Indiana Regional Partnership is putting together this branding campaign about talent recruitment and stuff. And I'm not sure if that's what they need to be looking at. I mean, I think you got to look at because the reality of it is in Indiana as well as other states, but here in Fort Wayne, people spend, 25% of their take-home on childcare. So if you're coming and you're only getting, it seems like a lot, 20,000 like a bump. It seems like a lot in your salary, but it's not. It's not enough. And I'm not talking about like when you become a C-level and then they pay for everything and they'll pay if you don't sell your house. I mean, that's a whole different. But for people like me who want to move and, the company doesn't pay for it, they don't help me set up my home. And then they tell me that they don't need to pay me as much because the cost of living is lower.
Yeah.
So I think that we have a lot of real issues to look at, that it's not just, to make it look good. How do you think that we look at and deal with some of these things?
again, there's a lot in that question that I
Right.
need to back up and
Well,
and
I'm
address.
just doing this so that you're going to have to come back and we're going to have part 2,
Okay.
part 3.
I
know
would,
that,
I would
right?
love that.
Okay.
When you're looking at talent attraction, you're looking at a very complex and complicated equation. I mean, it's both many steps and many influences
Right.
in making that happen. That more and more we're seeing 2-income couples,
Yeah.
right? And that,
Well, you have to.
and so that's one of the factors, is that how do you measure your family income? And so that's part of it.
Right.
And so can both of you succeed in that
Right.
area is a question. Again, your idea of are there gaps in the ladder? I think that any place you go, you're going to have gaps in that ladder, in order to make keep going up the chain. Sometimes you have to it's
the flaw of corporate America,
Right.
that in order to make more money and to get a bump, you have to leave.
Right.
I mean, it's just
that's why they call it a jump and
Right.
a bump,
Right.
In order to do that, you have to jump to a new organization, and
which
that's
is a flaw. That's a whole nother conversation.
That's
Right.
way beyond
Right.
Northeast Indiana.
Right.
But we're trying to figure that out. Is how do you figure what's best for your family unit? And we've talked a lot about the bottom line, because, as you said, if you get a $20,000 bonus from going from one job to another, that's only the top line.
Right.
And you really need to do all of the other calculations underneath it to see
If it really makes
if it
sense.
really makes sense. And so that's going to be a different equation for every family.
Right.
But by and large, in Northeast Indiana, our bottom line
Right.
is better than a lot of places, and that's due to the fact that some of those large expenses, like you were pointing out, that even though the housing is cheaper, other things are
They're
the
not.
same.
I mean, the only
but
thing
the
that
housing is always going to be the biggest portion of your budget.
Yeah, but I still will argue, and why I got on my soapbox about this is because when I saw that the cityscape townhouses downtown, this was my first time to Fort Wayne, and they started at $300,000. I said, you cannot tell me. And then when I looked to rent here, now granted, I also came from, major cities. So to me, yes,
Yeah.
it is. But also the only savings so first of all, it cost me more money to move here, because not only the move and everything, but because I didn't pay state or city taxes, and now I pay state taxes that's taken out of my income, right?
And it's only 1% on that property.
But it's still
and the choosing of where you live is one of those choices that you make as a lifestyle.
Right.
I live in a 4-bedroom family house 7 minutes from downtown.
Right.
That I bought for far less than $300,000.
right. But you're also somebody who came here and stayed. I mean, I moved every time,
Right.
and so, but the only savings I had really from Florida to here was my auto insurance.
Okay.
That did drop by 2/3
Okay.
because Florida has. So I understand the trade-off, but I just don't know if really the way we're promoting it, that this cost of it, I don't know if it really is to a benefit to us.
Well, you may be a bit of a unicorn in that your singular experiences in terms of what your profession is, in terms
Right.
of how volatile that may be,
Right.
and the choices that you make in terms of where you prefer to live,
Sure.
and how you prefer to live. Are those choices may not be reflective of the majority of
but
people.
I just look at that, and I'm also, I would love for you to come back so that we could talk about, because with the whole marketing and branding,
Yeah.
I'm just concerned that doing things like the welcome program that Greater Fort Wayne Inc. is
Yep.
doing, and then this branding, I think that we're sort of trying to put a bow on something without looking at the real issue, because that's easier to do than what you and I are talking about.
Yeah.
And I just wonder if we need to take a step back and really try to address some of these issues.
Yeah, and I think that on the global scale of looking at Northeast Indiana as a whole, those things are true. But where there are outliers, and to use another Malcolm Gladwell term,
right.
That those may not be true in 100% of each case. And for you may be an outlier in one or two different areas that are negative in your bottom line.
Right.
And that's,
It's
that's hard.
No, but it's really interesting. So, believe it or not, we'll have to continue our conversation.
I would love that.
So, at the end of each And Good Company program, I ask guests the same 12 questions that French novelist Marcel Proust popularized from a Victorian parlor game. What is your favorite word?
Oh my gosh, very interesting. Repose.
Really? Wow. What is your least favorite word?
This year, pivot.
Okay, yes, okay. What turns you on creatively, spiritually, or emotionally?
What turns me on, I guess, this is more of a rejuvenation, is the idea of solitude in the woods.
What turns you off creatively, spiritually, or emotionally?
Unanticipated deadline stress.
What sound or noise do you love?
The French horn.
What sound or noise do you hate?
I'll pick something really stereotypical, car horn.
Okay. What profession other than your own would you like to attempt? Now, you have several professions, but what profession would you like to attempt?
Fly fishing guide.
What profession, that goes with your solitude. What profession would you not like to do?
Politician.
What do you consider your greatest achievement?
My family.
Who, living or dead, would you most like to have a conversation with?
Winston Churchill.
How would you like to die?
At the end of a long life.
And if heaven exists, what would you like to hear God say when you arrive at the pearly gates?
Job well done.
Well, this was a job well done. I appreciate you having a seat at the table in our conversation, and we will continue it.
Love to.
Okay, great. And I hope that you will join me next time when you can again enjoy a seat at the table for great conversation and good company.